introductions keep on getting better. Who does my hair?
So does your hair.
Oh, otherwise I would have set the electric socket 10 seconds every morning.
So this panel is called What Lies Beneath, and it's about places that have been found underneath the water, which is, there's really an enormous amount of sites that have been found beneath the sea all over the world, not only in the oceans, in lakes as well, and a lot of times, like the places where they're finding these sites match up with the mythologies that are told in those places. Like in India, there's is it Dwarka that is beneath the sea, there happens to be all these stories, legends of Dwarka that are, considered mythology that may be confirmed by the presence of these sites. The same thing in off the coast of Florida and numerous other places. So I'll start with, why don't we start, David, with talk about one of the most recent sightings, which is, it's not been confirmed whether it's artificial or not, but off of the coast of Malibu, I think it's by Catalina maybe. There's a structure down there that looks like an artificial structure.
Yeah, recently the people have noticed by satellite?
Yeah.
Or something, yeah, that there's this underwater structure between Malibu and Catalina off the California coast, and it looks like an oil rig at about 2,000 feet underwater. And yeah, it seems to be some kind of alien base that's underwater there. And I mean, I suspect myself that this thing is perhaps an American Navy underwater base of a sort. It seems difficult to me that they wouldn't know about this. It's because it's so close to the California coast. But this is the kind of thing that must be all over the world, and it's one of the great mysteries of UFOs, is that UFOs are seen coming out of the water. And with these craft, they're anti-gravity, they're electric. Many of them look like submarines. They're long, cigar-shaped craft. But they are submarines. They're spaceships, they're airships, and they're submarines. And this Bermuda Triangle kind of stuff, and that's one of the things they think is going on in the Bermuda Triangle, is that there's a giant underwater base there. And the craft, one of the things that tapped into the Bermuda Triangle, and when I did that Bermuda Triangle episode a couple of years ago, and yeah, the guy who was caught up in that, what he thinks was happening was this giant spaceship was coming up out of the water, generating its own clouds and a hyperspace field around it, and was getting ready. It was coming up out of the water, a giant craft. And it was creating a big hyperspace field around it to jump to hyperspace. This is what the pilot believes was happening, and that he just happened to be flying in his small plane at the time and was being sucked up into this whole hyperspace vortex just by pure accident, because this giant craft was lifting up into space, but coming out of the water there, just off the coast of Florida. So how about that?
Yeah. Now, the structure that's beneath the water off the coast of Malibu, I don't know how thoroughly that's been investigated yet, if anyone's really been down there to look at it other than the photos, but there are other places where divers have been able to get up close that they're still calling natural formations, but the one that comes to mind for me is Yonaguni. Giorgio, could you talk a little bit about the underwater site off the coast of Japan?
Yeah, Yonaguni is on the island, or off the coast of the island of Okinawa, which is part of Japan. It's in the south. And in 1996, my good friend and co-publisher of Legendary Times, Ulrich Dopatka, actually went there on a scuba dive. He specifically learned how to scuba dive in order to explore Yonaguni, sorry. Lots of stuff going on in the head. And basically what happened was that Dr. Kimura of the university in, I don't remember which university it was, but Dr. Kimura was the first diver there that had discovered this place. And it's this gigantic, picture a rock in the water, and it's about 40, 50 feet underwater in front of the coast, but the formation itself seems as if it is an artificial structure, because you have multiple platforms, you have multiple steps, you have alleyways, or it seems like what you have alleyways. And so what we have suggested is that the actual formation of that mountain was natural, but then somebody went in there and carved away at that particular mountain. And so now imagine this, what would happen here, because this is 50 feet below the water surface. So this, either our ancestors did this while wearing scuba gear thousands of years ago, or this was done when the water levels around the world were lower. And the last time that was approximately 12,000 years ago, with the end of the last mini ice age. And so it's incredibly fascinating to see that, and if Yonaguni and Dwarka would be the only two places in front of the coast somewhere, or Bimini, then we could say, okay, it's possible that it's all natural and strange. But especially with Dwarka, I mean, it's an actual city, but there are dozens of examples worldwide of underwater or submerged structures. For example, in Malta, you have these cart ruts. They look like train tracks, even though they never were. And most of them are at the top of the island. But there are two of these cart ruts that go straight into the Mediterranean. And so for what? And in fact, they go into the Mediterranean for about 2 to 3 kilometers. So it's not like, they just wanted to, use it as a boat ramp, but perhaps that, this was all done. So the idea behind these underwater structures is that these things had to have been built when the water levels worldwide were much lower. And according to mainstream archaeology, 12,000 years ago, we were, according to them, all munching on bananas and, not understanding what's going on.
Well, and just to go on a little bit what Giorgio was saying, what geologists are saying about the last ice age 12,000 years ago was that ocean levels were 300 to 400 feet lower than they are today. 300 to 400 feet. And that is significant, and that would totally change all the continents. Islands suddenly become mini continents. The continental outlines of all the continents look completely different. And in ancient times, just like today, people would often build a city where a river meets the ocean. So if you built a city like that 15,000 years ago, that city today would be 300 to 400 feet under the ocean. And you cannot dive to those depths. You would need a bathysphere or a submarine or something like that to go down that deep to see those ruins. And so, I mean, that's, now we're talking about, Atlantis and the times of Atlantis. I mean, what Atlantis really is a civilization that's antediluvian, before the flood. And the flood is really the end of the last ice age.
And there are different ways to look at when we talk about Atlantis. I mean, there's traditionally it's talking about a particular civilization that existed before written history, before our recorded history. But it could mean really any of these civilizations that came before it. It's become, I think, more of a general term for maybe not one particular group of people, but it could just an entire civilization or multiple civilizations throughout the globe that existed perhaps 10,000 years ago, maybe even further. And so, Rabbi Ariel, I wanted to ask you about what evidence you find in religious traditions of such a society existing that long ago.
Well, if you want to talk about evidence, that's what we have David and Giorgio here. They're the archaeologists and the explorers of the external forms of things. But what I can tell you about is something most people are not aware of, and that's the existence of an 8th century text called Sefer Tmunah, the Book of the Image. It was attributed to a 1st century rabbi named Rabbi Yonaguni ben Akana, who is well known in the ancient literature as being of the Ezekiel school of Merkava ascent. And in this book, he outlines an entire history of the pre-Adamic civilizations, what they were like, who they were, and what their accomplishments were. And he says that in those days they had a much higher, superior race, possibly of a larger stature than our own, and that human beings, us, were like their pets. That they looked at us as we would today deal with domesticated animals as such.
Would you call them the Nephilim?
No. The Nephilim came later, much later. You could actually look at members of this civilization who at the time, not of the flood of Noah, but of an earlier collapse, which is also referred to in Kabbalistic literature as the collapse or the fall of the primordial kings. That at that time, the earlier civilization, because of its own states of imbalance, remember, they had a technology which was based upon what we would call today psychic telepathy, a mind-based technology. And their technology permeated the world. And it was in a state of imbalance which imbalanced all the natural forces, which then led to all of the imbalances which led to the natural disasters. So when we hear about the discoveries of all of these ancient lost places, from our point of view, it's like they say, nothing new under the sun. And there are many more discoveries yet to come. So indeed, we do know of these things. The history has always been there. And getting back to what the Sefer Tmunah tells us, is that they had an advanced technology which also went to the stars, which also was, we believe, in the inner or hollow earth, and that at the time of the flood, which was the antediluvian flood, not the flood of Noah.
Okay, I was going to ask you where Noah comes into the...
Noah's before Noah's Adamic. These are pre-Adamics.
Okay.
Right. These were the races who were here before. And their systems collapsed. And then according to the Kabbalistic way of understanding things, the Adamic race, which is actually a spiritual race, then incarnated here on Earth. And we were the outsiders. We were the invaders. We were the ones who were not indigenous here. And then our civilization developed and grew. We all know the Bible stories, Cain and Abel, the collapse and all. And then a membership of that group, of that body said, hey, let's go back and see if we can fix things. They were the, in quote, sons of God in Genesis 6, who came down, and because they are indigenous, were able to bond with women and sire children. And it was those children who were the mixed breed, had the access to the advanced technologies and the likes, which is described right in the Book of Enoch. Yep. And that is what then corrupted the world, which then led to an intervention, which then led to the flood of Noah. And that led to the final collapse of the what we would today call the Atlantean civilization.
Isn't he fascinating?
I've just got one more question, but if we're not, are we, does it say that we're from Mars or something?
No. Remember, if you gotta read your Bible in Hebrew.
Let me get on it.
Straight, because people don't really understand the text. It says, in the beginning, Elohim created the heavens and the earth. And that we were created in the image of Elohim. And then only later does it say, Adam was created, it says, from the dust of the earth, and then was breathed in, the Nishmat Hayim, the ruah, the spirit of life, by Vei Vavke, which is a different level and understanding of God. And especially when you go into the Kabbalistic literature, it says that Adam and Eve were originally in bodies of light, energetic bodies. It was only after what we call eating of the tree of knowledge, good and evil. Remember, they supposedly made a sacrifice, and it says they were covered with skins. Only then were they actually physically in this world. So we were essentially, what do they call it today? Astral or ethereal, right? And that we were in that place because originally what we call the spiritual and physical were one dimension. They weren't split as we are today. And as such, there was a natural movement, like a natural open bridge. There was no need for our conscious and unconscious. Everything was one. And that was the technology that the ancients were using. And that's why when we think about the great obelisks and all these things that are moved by mind power and all this that we've been talking about all weekend, right? This fits right into the biblical scenario. And most people don't even know that. And they think it's contrary to the Bible because they don't know the biblical traditions. So what can I say?
Okay.
That's my business there. All I do is try to let people know what's out there.
Jonathan, from a mythologist's perspective, can you talk about just looking at mythology, the line between kind of mythology and history, and how we're finding sometimes that in mythology, like places or people that maybe are thought to have been completely fictional are sometimes found to be true, and that mythology can be based on real events that are put in the form of a story.
Mythology is a big blanket term. The mythological systems can be based on fairy tales, legends, sagas, so there's a lot of different kinds of stories going on. First, I want to mention my very favorite undersea story, which is Lemuria, which is said to be somewhere in the Indian Ocean. There's one that's supposed to be in the Pacific Ocean, Mu it's called. But Lemuria is related to the little animals, lemurs. Okay, they were being studied. They are very present in Madagascar, a big island off the coast of Africa. There are some in Africa, there are some in India. In the study of the lemurs and how they possibly got distributed, one possibility would be that there was some kind of land bridge. So the theory came up that Madagascar at one time was connected to Africa and to India, and there are actually some islands out on the Indian Ocean that have submerged areas that have some structures there. So there's some archaeological evidence that could possibly relate to this. But the notion of an undersea civilization that is lost is usually quite advanced. We think of Atlantis and these stories from the Greeks on down to the mystics as being technologically far ahead of us, which is the ultimate fantasy of the good old days having been lost. Psychologically, an enormously important theme we have in our personal lives, that maybe something was really good in childhood or some part of our own personal history or family history, or perhaps the country at one time was better. This notion that something was lost, usually through a mistake. These are tales of warning tales, and since a lot of this literature comes from the Greeks warned in the tragic stories about hubris, arrogance, and that the mistakes would be made if we got too full of ourselves. These are important stories psychologically and morally to guide civilizations into not making the same mistakes. So we have a story, maybe there was a place, maybe there was not. I got in a bit of a tiff with Eric Van Donigen at the last time we did this, because I was saying Atlantis is a place in the heart, is a place we yearn for, a place of perfection and harmony and peace and beauty. And he says, Atlantis is not a place in the heart. Atlantis is an actual place. That's my. And
It's always been both.
Well, let me tell my story. That was the next thing I said. Was that it doesn't have to be one or the other. It is both. When we think of, if you take a pilgrimage, when I got out of Bible college, I wanted to go to the Holy Land, so I went to Jerusalem and I saw the sites and I saw where things had happened in the scriptures that I had studied, and I went out to Armageddon and the Bethlehem and Nazareth, the things you see. Now, I was in modern Israel most of that time, and this is a fascinating place and things are happening there. I was also in the ancient land, the place of the stories. I was also traveling with somebody I loved, so I was in that relationship. Most of the time, I was in my own psychology on a pilgrimage, something that was doing something for my spiritual journey. I was in all of those things at the same time. So when we have these stories, the connection between mythology and history is flexible, is somewhat elastic. Many of the stories have actual historical counterparts that tends to be called legend, the mixture of fact and fiction. Which is more important? I wouldn't want to choose. They are both important. Knowing the history and the unknown history is enormously important. Knowing what we yearn for is also significant. The Romantic poet said, "Tell me what you yearn for, and I will tell you who you are." This is one of the deepest things about the human character, is what we desire. We desire that there is an Atlantis somewhere, or was once. We desire that. I think because we desire it, therefore in its own way it is real, whether we ever find the buildings or not.
I mean, it's kind of this lost golden age of the past, that where everything was perfect. It was the golden age. Man lived in harmony with nature and with himself and his brothers, but we've lost all that
notion.
We yearn for this.
And it's an inspiring
lost
story.
age.
Maybe if we had it once, we can get it again. And whether that happened in history or not isn't as important as we have that vision.
Something to ponder, huh? By the way, we're having as much of a good time up here. I'm listening. I mean,
the point is that many a time when we discuss the inner reality of things, which is absolutely valid, we tend to think in mistaken ideas, to think that the internal is different from the external, and therefore they're different, and it's either one or the other. And no, it's just not. But everything that Jonathan just said is absolutely valid. He was mentioning Lemuria. Back in the 1930s, I think it was James Churchward, wrote 5 volumes. He was an archaeologist. 5 volumes on the history and teachings of Lemuria. And they've been around forever and ever. Right?
Yeah, for him it was the lost continent of Mu.
Yeah,
was
lost
that it?
continent.
Yeah, and he wrote that book in 1925.
They're still out there. I think the books are still available.
Oh yes, yeah. We
and it's an amazing exploration to see the external side of what is internally true. So what lies beneath? In the outside world or in the inside world? It's not a conflict. They're actually reflecting one to another. And like we said, the ancient technology, which is all mind, and how it influenced and affected the outside world, that's why. We are part and parcel of this world, whether we like it. We're not isolated. And in that respect, how we think, perception, quantum perception, all that, is how we deal with the world. So the fact that these stories do develop are there because of what our experience has been.
Let me tell a personal story. I'm a psychologist. I work with dreams a great deal, as many psychologists do. I have personally had a series of particularly significant dreams, significant to me, that took place underwater. One was my office, my consulting room was underwater, and people came and saw me for appointments, which is what my life is like. We, for some reason, could breathe water. The whole thing was underwater. And I lived and went for analysis and studied that dream for years, and came out with the idea that this work of self-exploration, has a lot to do with the unconscious. And for my personal dream, underwater represented the unseen part of the inner world, the part of ourselves that we're constantly studying but is always a little elusive. The idea that civilization may have sunk beneath the waves suggests that there is great elegance and purpose and imagination and richness to the human experience that is just a little out of sight, that we did have and is rediscoverable if we are earnest in our seeking. Now, that's a very psychological reading, and I want to repeat the part. I'm not, by saying that the archaeologists had nothing to do. These are not mutually exclusive. They can both be true.
Both are true. They reflect one another, and they exist because of one another. It's not just what's the word? Coincidence that we have something here and something there. No, it's all part of the greater whole.
And one of the reasons I think that the oceans are so fascinating to us is because of the fact that, I mean, for one, we're mostly a water world. We're more than 70% of the Earth's surface is ocean, and it's somewhere around 5% of the oceans have actually been explored.
One.
Okay.
I just saw a German special about this on TV a few weeks ago, where this underwater explorer was asked, and he's a diver that specializes in going into these underground caves that are prevalent underneath the Earth's crust, or in the Earth's crust. And when the moderator asked him, the host, how much of the world's oceans have been actually seen, and I'm not talking satellite stuff, exploration, he said less than 1%. It's probably around 0.8%. Okay, so what the hell do we know? We know nothing, because these ideas that perhaps there may be bases under the water or in the oceans, it's totally feasible, because we would never know, because we have explored less than 1%.
Even giant marine animals are still being discovered. I mean, huge ones. That whale shark was only discovered 25 years ago or so.
And they find new species too at the very depths of the ocean, where for the longest of time scientists have said it's impossible for any life to exist down there, and now these creatures actually have names. They're called extremophiles, and those extremophiles are living organisms that can live in the most hostile to us environments. Like the tardigrade can live in outer space. They've taken tardigrades to the International Space Station. They, for all intents and purposes, died, and then when they were brought back to Earth, they came back alive. So they just went into a state of suspended animation. And also, in Hawaii, recently, or 10 years ago, they found living organisms living directly next to lava tubes, where the lava would shoot out underwater. So, anything else would burn to death. So, Socrates has always said it the best. I know that I know nothing. And the more we discover, the less it all makes sense. And that's what's so interesting.
And interestingly, another, one of the most hostile places that you could imagine for life to exist would be on a meteor, on a comet. And there are many scientists today who are starting to believe that extraterrestrial life can survive within a comet. And we know that most of the meteors that fall to Earth as meteorites land in the ocean. And so they're landing and they're going to the depths of the ocean, these places where beings are existing without photosynthesis, where they can exist on like hydrothermal vents in the most crazy environments. And they're finding life, as Giorgio said, where scientists said it could not exist. And so can you talk about like that, the possibility that there could be life, organisms arriving to Earth that are then somehow able to survive in the ocean?
Absolutely. In fact, this is the idea that is a bona fide scientific proposition, how life originated on Earth through the idea of panspermia. Panspermia, there's two versions, panspermia and direct panspermia. And panspermia essentially suggests that life was brought here due to meteors that crashed here, and that while these fragments were flying through the galaxy, that everywhere they would pick up spores here and cells there and some pieces of DNA there, and then depending on where this meteor would pass, if you have a habitable or an area that's conducive to life for that particular bunch of bacteria, that is where life could originate. Now imagine, like for example, if you start throwing grass seeds, they will grow, even in the most inhospitable of environments, like in concrete cracks or anywhere. Now, direct panspermia, the idea is that extraterrestrials on a distant planet sent out probes with the deliberate idea that these probes are packed with DNA and cells and all sorts of different organisms. They're being sent through space, and somewhere, this DNA or these cells would be able to create life. And so either suggestion is interesting. And of course, the ancient astronaut theory suggests that these two ideas are interesting and very feasible, but we are taking it one step further, and we're saying that they actually came here, and the DNA was changed through a target artificial of our DNA.
And some biologists are actually suggesting that octopuses are actually extraterrestrial forms of life that have come here from another planet because they don't find the evolutionary history there, and just octopuses are just very strange. They're very smart. They have abilities to telepathically communicate between each other somehow. It's all very strange. So they're looking particularly at octopuses as something that's been brought here.
And if you've ever seen the aliens on The Simpsons, they look just like octopi.
And Cthulhu, H.P. Lovecraft's Cthulhu, he was sort of an octopus space god. Yeah.
And Arrival.
Going on with the film thing for a moment here, some of our great visionaries are film writers, and the two great movies, The Sphere and The Abyss, explored this theme. that perhaps long ago visitors came and went to the bottom of the ocean, set up camp, and waited for us to be ready.
One of the greatest ancient astronaut theory movies ever made is exactly what he just said, The Abyss. And make sure you watch the director's cut. It'll blow your mind, because the theatrical version that ended up in was it 1987 or 88 or something, it was great. It was fantastic. But the main point of that movie is in the director's cut. So tonight, go check out The Abyss, watch the director's cut, and you'll be happy that you've revisited that great movie.
I just recently watched that too. Again, the director's cut of The Abyss. That is a pretty good movie. And the whole idea that we're going to have extraterrestrial bases on this planet. The moon is an ideal extraterrestrial base to watch this planet. But yeah, if you're coming here and you want secret bases, you can hollow out mountains, and there's stories like this in South America and Tibet. Mount Shasta in Northern California has also this same mythology around it.
Lemurians.
Yeah, the Lemurians are living inside this mountain. It's a hollow mountain. It's a space base. UFOs come in and out of this mountain. At a mountain like that, exactly like that, exists in Colorado Springs. It's where NORAD is located. It's called Cheyenne Mountain. It is a hollowed out mountain just outside it. It's a city inside it. There's elevators there, there's tunnels, trains and things going. People in Colorado and New Mexico believe there's a tunnel system going from Cheyenne Mountain to Dulce, New Mexico, to Albuquerque and to Roswell and Los Alamos. So you have stories like that, but underwater, this is another good place. And UFOs are seen coming out of the oceans. They're often seen coming out of the lakes, the Great Lakes. There, in Michigan and Minnesota, and Wisconsin, and Illinois, Ontario, UFOs are often seen coming out of those lakes. And in fact, the Great Lakes of North America are the largest source of fresh water in the world, left over from the last ice cap, actually. But yeah, this and it's kind of a new thing, and the Abyss really gets into this, that our oceans, there's UFOs, there's underwater bases, and I think even our Navy has started to create some of these too.
Well, the concept of Lemuria has been well known and actually integrated into the social fabric for many years. Many of you might not remember the Gene Autry serials from Saturday morning.
Yeah.
He went and fought the Queen of Lemuria.
The Phantom Empire.
Gene Autry. This is the days like Flash Gordon and Buck Rogers. So it was
documentation is where you find it.
Yeah, there you go. But
even singing cowboys are into Lemuria.
Singing cowboys fought Lemuria. But it's always been there. The knowledge of these things is nothing new. That's my emphasis here. And, it's been marginalized, I think, in recent decades to think of this as some like new age and therefore discounted kind of information. But it's been around for centuries, and it was well done. Ignatius Donnelly, who wrote the book of Atlantis and the Antediluvian World, I think he was a congressman.
He was a congressman from Minnesota, and I know that you saw the latest Godzilla movie.
Oh,
and that has underwater stuff, a hollow Earth. They're going in and out of these wormholes under the ocean and hollow Earth.
The director of that second Godzilla movie, Mike Dougherty, is a gigantic, huge fan of Ancient Aliens. So all of this ancient astronaut reference in the movie he gleaned directly from our show that we all love.
And we're talking about finding life forms under the oceans, right? Yeah. Godzilla lives under the ocean.
Yes.
I once gave a class many years ago, and I said Godzilla is real. It's spoken about in the Bible. How many people know where Godzilla is found in the Bible?
The book of Daniel, isn't it?
No. The book of Job speaks of the Leviathan.
Leviathan.
Go read the description of the Leviathan. big, breathing under the water with fire under his breath and the likes. There's an interesting story that's taught in the Talmud that two great rabbis, Rabbi Eliezer, Rabbi Yoshua, once on a boat trip somewhere, it doesn't say where, and that one night he went out at night and he gazed out onto the waters and he saw these two big eyes of fire staring up at him from underneath. Freaked him out, went up and woke up his friend, says, "Look what's under the water. What's that?" He says, "That must be the Leviathan." And when you hear all the stories of the Kraken and the giant squids, and they found giant squids now. They found dead bodies, they found them living.
Oh, absolutely.
There's a lot more underneath.
And actually many prehistoric animals like plesiosaurs, these sea serpents, I mean, massively huge animals that supposedly became extinct 65 million years ago can easily still be living in our oceans.
Easily. And just as a quick word here, you remember when the Bible says that the flood of Noah came and wiped out all life? It said it only wiped out land life. It specifically does not mention the life in the oceans.
Yet it doesn't seem that these aquatic, prehistoric animals, dinosaurs, should be really extinct.
Well, they did find the coelacanth alive and well today. The coelacanth is 65 million years old.
They thought 85 million. They thought it was extinct
sorry.
85 million years ago, and then they started catching them off Madagascar and South Africa. Yeah, so there you go. Well, turtles, sea turtles, just like we know them, maybe a little bigger. They've
Crocodiles?
They've all been around for 100,000 years. Sharks and stuff. So all these other animals too, and plesiosaurs and giant sea serpents. There's no reason why they're not still alive.
Part of being born again in my tradition was to get an immersion baptism. And I went down to the lake and the pastor put me under and it was very cold. I remember it clearly. I also was very excited about the implications for my faith. The deluge, the stories of great storms and floods, and it's like a purification ritual for the entire planet. When we think of our history and that we have had these renewal experiences involved with great floods and maybe heading toward them again. But we need to study what the waters mean to us. I had one thought from earlier in the panel, the idea of cities at the mouths of rivers that are down way under the ocean now. Let me just say the nightlife is terrible.
Unless you're looking for a drink.
One thing that we've, on a number of recent episodes of Ancient Aliens, we've talked about kind of the ubiquity of gods that are depicted with amphibious characteristics. David, can you talk about how that relates to the Dogon and also like some of the tribes of not only Africa, but then you can find it in Central America?
Yeah, you've got the Dogon and the Nomo there in Mali and Sierra Leone and all that. And the story of the Dogon is a weird one where they supposedly, according to the people, these craft landed, these spaceships landed, and then after the craft landed, it created a big lake around the craft. And then the extraterrestrials got out of the craft and jumped into the lake and then swam up to them. And that these extraterrestrials, or the Nomo, there's aquatic humans, sort of like amphibious humans, like what we would call a mermaid or a merman, but with hands and faces and things like that, but with the tail of a fish. And we have the same thing in Sumeria.
With Atlantis.
Yeah, Atlantis, and even stories of Vishnu as well. One of the Hindu gods that he's depicted sometimes as a half man, half fish. And so these stories are, in a sense, that, these extraterrestrial gods, in part, are semi-aquatic, really. And they live partially on land and partially in the water. And I mean, this seems incredible to us and just seems, pretty bizarre. And yet, it seems that other planets, too, are more watery than even our planet is. But it would seem, too, that life on other planets, and just like on our planet, needs water. We need a balance of water, and we have so much water on our planet, but we need land areas, too. In theory, too, with mechanical space flight, of having metals and machines and technology, it seems, in my mind, it seems difficult to be able to have a metal foundry and to mine metals underwater and have a foundry and all that. Those things, I may be totally wrong, seem to have to happen on dry land. even if you're an aquatic, extraterrestrial. So, I mean, these are kind of things we're trying to figure out.
But according to the movie Aquaman, it works.
Okay.
And don't forget the Submariner and the most important evidence of them all, Bikini Bottom.
I want to open it up to questions in a minute, but before I do, since this is the last Ancient Aliens panel of the weekend, if there's anything else you want to add, I just want to give you an opportunity to, if there's anything on this topic or something else.
I want to jump in quickly, just that we have talked about movies a good deal here. That may seem lightweight, but actually when we do the work of trying to come to terms with something that's very hard to understand, the idea of connection with other intelligence, we need all the imagination we can get. Some of our best thinkers are in the arts.
Absolutely. Now, just for the record, let me add one last thing here. We're talking about these types of hybrid human or aquatic type of beings. Well, in 1615, there was a Rabbi Avraham Azulai who penned a book called Hesed LaAvraham, in which he documents from ancient sources that there are, it was at least known to him, over 300 different types of species, which were half human and half animal. So all different types of combinations of things. And it's curious to find a reference to this in, again, biblical Judaic literature, whereas most people would consider this to be something external and excised from the system and idolatry and all the like. We have to dismiss those mythologies because they're just not right. So yeah, there is a history of it. Very well known.
Okay.
All right, go ahead.
This is to you, Max. So when you do the crossover between ISO and AA so that Giorgio and Zachary can put the final nail in this whole thing?
Well, we don't actually produce In Search of. It's a History Channel show, but it's not a Prometheus Entertainment show. So there's no crossover between In Search of and Ancient Aliens, unfortunately.
Yeah, that's too bad.
Yeah.
So where are you guys going to be next year?
Well, we're looking into Ethiopia right now. We're going to India. We're going to.
No, I mean, where's AlienCon going to be?
We at this time we don't know yet. We're still looking into that. So I couldn't say, but well, as soon as Mars, yes.
Antarctica.
All right, thank you.
Let me grab this and say I was on an earlier iteration of In Search of, and we did a whole show about the lake monsters, which is not unrelated to what we're talking about today. It was a great show. I'm glad to see that series back.
Hey guys, what are your opinions on the Eye of the Sahara being the potential location for Atlantis?
Right. Yeah, we had that same question. Let me answer that, you guys. I read an article on that. Yeah, the Eye of the Sahara. Somebody's called the Eye of Africa. It's in Mauritania, northern Mauritania, out in the Sahara Desert, and it's concentric circles, which is, as I talk about, Atlantis. And satellite photos, yeah, it looks very curious. Atlantis was said to be concentric circles and canals, and then you came into an inner city that right at the center of all these concentric circles. And the Eye of Africa does look like that. So some people have suggested that, well, perhaps this was where Atlantis was. And other people have suggested, particularly French writers and things, that Atlantis was in the Sahara Desert, which is where the Eye of Africa is. It seems that the Atlantis itself was described as a very large city with huge fleets of ships and things like that. And the Eye of Africa is not that large. It's it's not that large of an area. So though it looks a lot like how Atlantis was described, it seems that the real Atlantis would have been much larger than the Eye of Africa. That's my opinion.
Okay, thank you.
Another detail about Atlantis, we remember in the story that Atlantis sank was destroyed because the people had it good and became arrogant. This is classic Greek tragedy, that we start thinking we're gods, we're heading for a bruising. So that is a lesson for our time.
Thank you.
Hi, since this is the last panel, I'm going to try to ask this question. On September 19th of 2018, solar observatories around the globe were shut down, and some photos of some ships diving into the sun, as well as an entire fleet then surfaced. I wonder if you all had any thoughts on that.
Did you hear about that? You know, I kind of heard about that, but there were these.
I'm not educated enough to have an opinion.
I don't, maybe you know about it, Max. Yeah, I saw that, and there were these photos. Yeah, and there was like fleets of UFOs around the sun, and they released that. And the idea was that they shut down these observatories so that they wouldn't, the public, they could keep a lid on it, and the public and these observatories wouldn't release all these photos.
Do you think they're taking power from our sun because they've said also the black spots are showing up more frequently, and is that them taking our sun's energy?
Don't worry, she'll be alive for a long time.
Yeah, I don't think we have to worry too much about it. Yeah, they can have all of the sun's energy.
Yeah, they can take it all for
Okay. The sun's got plenty of energy for everybody, including the aliens. Yeah.
Yeah, my name is Fred. My question that many of us have, in your opinion, where does God, with a capital G, fit into the UFO equation?
Well, there we go. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. If they're aliens, then they're created by God just like we are. That's a real simple thing. Now, hold on a second. People ask me all the time, how could you believe in extraterrestrials? I said, well, that's what the Bible says. Now, doesn't it? I said, where does the Bible say that? Very simple. Does not the Bible mention angels? Are angels from Earth? No, they're not terrestrial, are they? They're extraterrestrial. Well, there you go. No one ever said alien, that the extraterrestrial, the angels, are little green men and little flying saucers going around with like ray guns. No, things are a little bit more sophisticated than that. But you do have a number of people, specifically of the Christian faith, who are very well aware of the existence, by understanding scriptures, that the Lord did create other life on other planets, and that right now we're focused on the here and the now, in our world, in our life, in our faith. And for those people who are of religion and want to hold true to the Bible, of course, that's their right and it's what they're supposed to be doing. But they also have to understand that you have to understand Scripture correctly and properly in order to serve the Lord in accordance to that path that you've so chosen. And you can't just pick and choose what to believe. I'm sorry, that's what I say. Study and learn your Bibles. Read it, what it really says. I hope I've answered the question.
I'd like to add to that, there should be a difference between the extraterrestrials and God, because, and I said this on a couple of other panels as well, where, even extraterrestrials have to have questions about God, about existence, about how it all began. And, oftentimes I'm accused, so who helped the aliens? Other aliens? And the answer to that is yes. So you played this game backwards to the very beginning, if there ever was a beginning. And with all due respect, that is creation. That is God.
I'm going to add something just on a lighter note. Being a rabbi, I deal with all this stuff. People always send me information and stuff like that. And I once received this book, which is allegedly, classified government document. Yeah, I get all this weird stuff, but whatever. And anyway, apparently, when the aliens, the extraterrestrials, are communicating with our government authorities, they're very chatty. They have a lot that they want to say. But they're not talking about like technologies and anti-gravitational fields and wormholes. All they're talking about, supposedly, is religion. They're talking about the nature of the soul, the nature of the spirit. Oh my God, are you telling me that the first extraterrestrials making contact with us are missionaries?
I would not be surprised, because that will be the first thing that we will do if we travel to outer space. Yeah. We will try to bring Christianity and whatever the hell else.
Maybe that's what they're coming here to do.
By the way, I'm not a proponent of that. I hope this will never happen.
I mean, I have one Christian missionary at the door, and then I have the other Christian missionary, and then I have the alien missionary at the door. This is getting confusing.
Yeah. A rabbi and a pope and an alien.
There you go. Get on the moon.
Hello. Hi.
Hi, my name is Briley, and this isn't a question, but I just wanted to say, since it's the last AlienCon, that you guys inspire me.
Thank you.
Well, thank you very much. That's great.
You guys show no fear and want to prove to the world, like, not to be afraid, but there are aliens. And I just, you're my role model.
Okay, well, thank you very much. And by the way, you are the next generation. We need new researchers. So if this is your passion, follow it. I always say whenever I meet younger people, I say, do me a favor. Stay in school.
Follow your dreams.
Expand your mind. Always follow your heart. And from time to time, listen to your elders. And usually I say parents, but yes, so thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Okay. My name is Wendy. I'm from Richmond, Virginia. And before I get to my question, David, please enjoy your trip next week.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, I'm going to Virginia next week.
Yeah. All right, so my question is for all of you. Okay, the show has been on like forever, and you've covered so many subjects, topics, all this stuff. Which ones have really stuck with you after all the episodes you've done, and why? And the second part of my question, mainly for Giorgio and David, when do you guys rest? Y'all go everywhere.
Well, the one thing that I always defer to is the crop circle thing, because that to me is where, 20 years ago, had you asked me about modern day UFOs, I would have said, no, my UFOs happened in the distant past. This is also Eric's answer. But at the same time, there is something going on in the present day with unidentified flying phenomena. And so when we did that crop circle episode, we actually created a crop circle artificially with wooden boards. And you could see that at the bottom of the crop circle, it was chaotic. All the stalks were broken. It was not nice. It was just, but it looked like a wonderful crop circle, and we did it within about 3 to 4 hours. Now, there are photos of the so-called, and in my opinion, 90% of crop circles are man-made, and it's a wonderful artistic expression, great. However, 10% of crop circles are real, and you can prove this because on the inside of those crop circles, not only is the ground, none of the stalks are broken, sometimes they are interwoven like a ponytail, and then here comes the kicker. When a stalk grows, every so many feet you have a node, and this node is very, very small, about 2 millimeters or 3 millimeters. And inside the crop circle of an actual real crop circle, the nodes are elongated by up to 300%. And right outside of the crop circle, in the same area, the nodes are still 2 millimeter thick. So you tell me how that is done. And Dr. Elcho Hasselhoff proposed that this was done through some type of plasma energy. And when I told him that, please continue your research into this, he said, I have no other choice. Now that's a real scientist. So that to me was one of my most memorable experiences, and it changed my opinion on a lot of things.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I don't really...
There's a lot, that really stuck out, but, we're always struggling with answering questions like that because personally, and of course Max and I were involved, and he more than I, each episode we are dealing with, we have affairs with these episodes, and so each of these episodes, for me at least, is a special thing. Each of these I consider them my children. So they're all my favorite episodes.
Yeah. Right. Yeah.
I want to mention one theme, though. It wasn't a particular episode. From time to time, we deal with imaginary places, or perhaps they were real, like Shambhala, that represent heaven on earth. These are what in literature are called Edenic locations. I think they're enormously important in world history and in real life, that we at least imagine there are places where there's enormous beauty. I think it gives us a place to aspire to.
Yeah.
Thank you for making my very first AlienCon with my mother and I very memorable. And this is my birthday, and I'm enjoying this.
Well, all right. Happy birthday. Thanks for coming.
Thank you.
Thanks to all you guys for coming here.
All right, we have about 2 minutes left, just so we'll get in 2 or 3 more questions.
How you doing, guys? It's a question for the whole panel, particularly Giorgio, if you can answer this. What are your thoughts on the Emerald Tablets of Thoth and how they fall in line, sort of, I guess, timeline-wise with the Sumerians and Anunnaki and all that?
I personally have no opinion, so I defer to David or somebody else.
Yeah, do one of you guys, are you familiar with that? The Emerald Tablets of Thoth? Have you heard of it?
Good work. You stumped the panel.
You got
Billy Carson talks about them a lot.
That's right, and I've seen his books and stuff like that. Have you ever heard of that?
I'm familiar with it. It's one of the old Egyptian, type of.
Yeah, it's a kind of Egyptian.
Anything else? When you deal with ancient Egyptian type mysticism, you have to remember it's not something new. It's been around for a very, very long time. It's dated back from the days of like when Jesus was around, and you had just as you have in Jewish sources and Christian sources, legendary books of things that are supposed to have existed. Well, so you have it from the Egyptian. They put it in the name of the Egyptian. And gee, I'd love to see a copy of it in print today. And when we do, then I guess we'll be able to deal with it. So yeah, a lot of these things are claimed to exist. And well, we're still waiting.
I think that's kind of a modern book rather than a ancient.
Well, it's just the thing. It's a claim. I don't even know if it really exists.
Yeah, right. I mean, it's more of a concept in a sense.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Hey, I want to say something like the girl had said, that you guys, in a time of politics and the world upheaval, you tuned in to what each episode says, and your faith grows massive every time. It's just like, okay, Revelation speaks in the end, these upheavals will come up, but the good's gonna win. It's almost like Mars was part 1 and they're dried up. This is part 2 and the good guys win, and y'all tune us into that beyond any politics, right? So that makes my heart glow.
Oh, good.
Thank you.
Yeah,
Thank
nice.
you.
Yeah.
Thank you. I wanted to ask the first panel with the prophecies, the lady who was speaking, I forgot her name.
Carolyn?
She had said the consciousness that you have, and you come back as one form, and you feel that consciousness. I truly believe that the chronological order of like some kind of huge loving being, from Anu to Ra to Siddhartha to Zeus to David to Christ, Muhammad, is in one line. This vibe comes back. So just asking, with all these episodes that are yet to come, right, there's so much to learn. Is it a taboo? I mean, I guess it goes to the executive too, is like to talk about like Christ, this is science meets religion, boom. But I mean, Christ was probably such an awesome being, right? Just like Buddha, just like David, all so strong. When is that episode coming?
Well, it's Kevin Burns, the creator, always jokes that that'll be the final episode, is when we say Jesus was an alien. But in seriousness,
and I hope it remains a joke.
In seriousness, we have touched on, there's nothing really that's taboo. We've looked into all different world religions. We have talked about, we haven't talked, we're never going to come on and say Jesus Christ was an alien. But we've talked about, the certain things like the Shroud of Turin, or things that are related with Christianity, where it's talking about like, well, is there some sort of technology involved, or is it just some sort of energy? As William Henry would say, he talks about, light beings, or as the Rabbi mentioned earlier, are there things about certain people that have prophets or whoever that have existed that maybe they are in touch with something higher, or maybe it's kind of a left an open question. Is this something extraterrestrial? Is it something spiritual? And that's not really something that we can answer. It's just we sort of look at what the stories say, and we let our contributors kind of weigh in. But yeah, I don't think we'll ever do an episode that's on specifically on Jesus.
Yeah.
But it's not because it's taboo. It's
If you want to follow that line though, in the 1970s, a book was written by the German author. I'm not endorsing it. I'm just giving you information because you're interested.
Yeah.
It was called Jesus the Astronaut by Gerhard Steinhäuser.
Wow.
So check that out, and there he proposes this thing, especially because the whole idea of Mary with the Immaculate Conception and all this stuff. So I am not of that opinion, but it's definitely a very interesting book, and especially if you're interested.
I'm a Rastafarian too, so I believe in Selassie. You guys are going to Ethiopia. They have the temples built into the ground incredibly, right? And
Lalibela, those rock cut temples.
And all the Rastas really speak of what's to come is going to be, the hand will come down in the form of these angelic Elohim aliens, and that's it,
That's fascinating.
Great. Well, thank you so much.
All right, we can get one last question.
One last
and
question.
We're going to have to cut it off. I have a plane.
Hey guys, my name's Jordan. David, first of all, I just want to say that you're coin of my hero.
You got to ask yourself why you think that.
Or you have to wonder.
No, my question is, obviously everybody knows you guys now, and you've been doing Ancient Aliens for a while, but you started this before, Ancient Aliens, and how has your lives changed after, all these seasons of Ancient Aliens and all these people knowing who you are and subscribing to what you believe now too?
Well, here's what happens to me. I'll often be like at an airport, and somebody will come up to me and they'll say, aren't you one of those guys on Ancient Aliens? And I'll say, yeah, I'm on that show. And they'll say, can I ask you a question? And I'll say, yeah, go ahead. And they'll say, what's with that guy's hair?
Electromagnetic waves.
Is that what happens to you?
That actually happens. No, look, it's still so incredibly surreal after 10 years. I mean, this is not normal what's happened here. It's not. Tell me another TV show besides Star Trek that later had their own convention. So, and I have to say that this only happened, all of us, we're only sitting here because of you guys. If you guys would have not tuned in and stayed with us, so our thanks actually goes to you. I love you too. I love everyone in here because we would not be here without you. So
give yourselves a hand. Okay, give yourselves a hand. Talk about you.
See you at the next one.
Yeah.